Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. So today I wanted to talk about a phenomenal historical fiction trilogy, the Ancient Rome Trilogy by Robert Harris. This trilogy is, of course, 3 books, the first book being Imperium, the second book is Conspirata, which is also titled Lustrum in the UK, and the third book is Dictator, which is of course centered on the dictator Julius Caesar. This trilogy follows the life and career of Marcus Tullius Cicero, the famous Roman orator and senator. The story is told from the perspective of Tiro, who was Cicero's slave, but quite a privileged slave in that he was Cicero's right-hand man. He took down full speeches using a shorthand that we still draw upon today. Some of the symbols that he invented, I believe the ampersand, we still use today. Tiro would help Cicero circulate his speeches. He helped him set up meetings with various politicians in Rome. So while he was a slave who did ultimately attain his freedom, he was quite privileged in Cicero's household, and we can say became more of a friend than anything. Cicero is a complex character. On the one hand, he claims to be a man of principle, someone who is devoted to the Republic, and in many ways he is, but he can be quite hypocritical. For example, Cicero was pivotal in making Pompey the general of earth and sea in the East, which laid the foundation for a Julius Caesar. So then, when Cicero opposes Caesar for doing exactly what Pompey did in the East and what Pompey wanted to do in Rome, I find that to be quite hypocritical. We could also say that Cicero's approach to ending the conspiracy against the Republic led by Sergius Catilina was hypocritical. Those are the events discussed in book 2. So a quick overview of the trilogy. So in book 1, we start with Cicero, who is not from one of the great patrician families. He's an equestrian. He struggles with a stutter, but he is trained to become this great orator. He is involved in prosecuting a very corrupt governor of Sicily, Gaius Verres. And because of his successful prosecution of Verres and just how juicy that case was and how deftly he handled it, he ultimately is made consul by the end of book 1. But we see already that Caesar and Cassius have different plans for the Republic. In book 2, which is Conspirata, Lustrum in the UK, that book focuses on the Catilinarian conspiracy, which ultimately ends in Cicero being forced into exile. Book 3, he returns from exile, and of course we are dealing with Caesar's last days, and then how Cicero fights Mark Antony, and all of that. That book, the third one, was the most thrilling. The first and third books, I think, are the strongest. I gave them both 5 stars. The second book, I gave 4 stars, but I still enjoyed the second book. Even though I have taken a few years of Latin, I was never really interested in ancient Rome. I was always more interested in the Middle Ages. I actually started out doing my doctorate in medieval French literature and then ended up working on the Renaissance. So what I knew about ancient Rome was through the Renaissance texts that I would pull from ancient Rome, cite sources, maybe even think of France as being a Troy or something like that. But I had never actually learned about the Roman Republic or the Empire. But this trilogy has gotten me really interested in reading all kinds of literature about that period, both fiction and nonfiction. And actually, I plan very soon on rereading William Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, which is, in my opinion, Shakespeare's best play. I also think that Shakespeare's histories are very underrated. I think they are brilliant. I also want to read Lucan's Pharsalia, which I've read parts of, again, for my dissertation. And then I want to read SPQR by Mary Beard. I do want to reread I, Claudius by Robert Graves. It's very easy to compare Robert Harris's trilogy to I, Claudius. But I will say that despite both having a really large cast of characters, I found that those characters were more manageable in the trilogy. I found that Robert Harris did a better job at helping me follow each of the different characters, really fleshing them out. I felt that most of these characters were familiar enough that I wasn't completely confused. Whereas I, Claudius, I loved that book. I thought it was brilliantly written, but I also found it really hard to follow. Or maybe I'm becoming better at actually following intricate histories. We'll see. I will be rereading I, Claudius, but I certainly found Robert Harris's trilogy to be quite manageable. The characterization is brilliant. It is a very focused work. It focuses on the senators and the drama between the senators. It doesn't focus as much on the people. And so, in that way, although Cicero is kind of hypocritical, and although Cicero is not, this perfect person by any means, it is definitely more pro-patrician. Tiro is, after all, the narrator. I would love to read a historical fiction that is more in favor of Caesar. I must admit I've never been a fan of Caesar. I can definitely see that the late Republic was broken and that reforms were needed. But yeah, I'm not the biggest fan of Caesar. I will say that in Robert Harris's trilogy, the most respectable character is probably Cato. He is definitely a man of his principles for the most part. His involvement in ending the Catilinarian conspiracy, I would also say, was a little bit questionable too. I don't necessarily agree with the way that he and Cicero prosecuted the men involved in the conspiracy. But even so, I very much admire Cato. I admire people who stand by their principles. But the trilogy is definitely focused on the senators. And I think that that's also its strength. It's not trying to take on everything, even though at the same time you really do feel like you have a bird's eye view of the event. Cicero, in many ways, was a minor political figure. He's more known for his speeches, which you should definitely read. Lawyers today would not get away with the rhetoric that Cicero used. There weren't laws against slander in ancient Rome. There are certainly laws today against it. Lawyers wouldn't be able to do what he did. But for that reason, his speeches are so juicy. Definitely read his speeches against Varus. So hopefully this got you interested in picking up the first book. You should definitely pick it up if you like historical fiction, or if you just like histories. This is a well-researched trilogy. It is quite historically accurate. So, this is a good way of getting into history again, even if, you don't always read nonfiction. So I'm going to go back to drinking my iced coffee, which has hazelnut creamer in it, and I will talk to you later. Thank you, everybody. Bye now.